Folks, last night protesters took to the streets across the country in support of Freddie Gray. Of course, folks, you had people in New York, in Los Angeles, in Washington, D.C., in all other major cities as well, showing solidarity with folks in Baltimore. Yesterday also was the 23rd anniversary of the Los Angeles riots. And so many people, again, are asking the question, what is next? This whole issue of how do we make changes to the criminal justice system? How do we confront what is happening when it comes to police and African Americans, not just men, but also women? It is a significant issue that we are facing, and we're doing so right now while the Baltimore Police Department, they are reporting tomorrow, turning over their report to the state prosecutors as it relates to what happened to Freddie Gray. But what is happening right now is they're already leaking details of their report by quoting a witness in the van saying that, well, Freddie was basically, he severed his own spine. Seriously. So the report they said they're not going to make public, they're already leaking to make them look good, saying Freddie Gray somehow killed himself. Let's talk about it with our panel. We have Candace Burns of the group consulting firm Cleo Monago, Black Men's Exchange, and Kim Keenan, President and CEO of Multicultural Media Telecom and Internet Council. We've seen the dance before. We've seen folks release these reports, and all of a sudden it's to make them look good. We can see right through this whole deal. But what gets me is, again, we're not going to make it public, but we're going to make it public by leaking it to the Washington Post.
But they said they were going to make it public, and so the very fact that they're not going to make it public but then leak it, that makes it look worse. And they don't realize this, the lack of transparency is at the heart of the problems that you're seeing in Baltimore today and all around the country, and that's why it's so broken.
So there were cameras apparently in the van. They weren't working.
Right.
They didn't have body cameras because the mayor did not, she vetoed the bill, didn't sign the bill back in November, where they could have had body cameras. And so we are to take the word of the cops in this case as it relates to Freddie Gray. But we think about the North Charleston case, how that police officer and the other cops turned in a police report that was 180 degrees different than exactly what happened on the video. They lied, but somehow we're supposed to believe this report by saying, yeah, Freddie Gray basically was slamming his own head up against the wall. That's how he severed his spine. That's kind of hard to do.
Well, first of all, how do you prove he did it? Because the guy couldn't actually see him doing it. He wasn't seatbelted.
He claims he heard him.
He heard him, but how could he know it was his head and not his foot and not something else? And he wasn't seatbelted.
Well, none of that logical stuff. Here I go with the issue of logic.
Sorry.
That's not the.
I'm using logic.
I know. You know that happens.
Damn,
that happens on this set. That's irrelevant.
Okay,
they're trying to paint a picture to prepare themselves for getting off for murdering this young man.
Yeah.
So they always do that. I remember the case that recently with a young man, the A student got harassed, and they kept harping on the illusion that he had a fake ID and made that a big deal.
Yeah, at University of Virginia.
Yeah, and they found out that was not true.
Right.
So hopefully our community.
Now look, this is the video. He is being dragged. This is the video of him being dragged
Horrible.
to the van. Yeah, it looks like he is angry with himself.
Right.
He is upset, Candace.
Yeah.
He's inside just going nuts.
So now, Roland, listen, you know the city of Baltimore in the past has faced millions. They've paid out millions upon millions of dollars of fees to folks who have sued them for police misconduct. So we should expect more leaks like this. First, he had a spine surgery prior to his arrest, which we now understand could or could not be a rumor. It looks like that is purely a rumor.
No, first of all, the Baltimore Sun. First of all, it was two rumors: spine surgery, car accident. Baltimore Sun blew those out of the water.
Both unfounded.
Not true.
Both unfounded. Now you're hearing that, okay, perhaps he's tried to injure himself in the van. So that's to be expected. I will say, though, that the mayor gave some good comments this morning. She said this. She said, you know, I'm less concerned about the optics of justice, and I'm more concerned about achieving and getting justice for Freddie Gray and his family. So now,
she said that?
She did. She said it this morning on CNN.
But
so with that being said,
and also, let me say this here.
Okay.
I mean, we have been trying to get the mayor to come on TV One, talk about it, and I communicated with her on Sunday, so we've been trying all week. So we're still trying. But go ahead.
I'm going to look forward to that because I know you're going to ask all the tough questions, and I'm sure that she's going to have some strong answers for you. Listen, at the end of the day, There's not a sprint to the end of this case. We would like it. I know that the public is hungry for answers, but that's not the case.
The thing that what we know now, and we've seen this over and over and over again, and this is where it really jumps out at me. At the end of the day, cops consistently lie.
Yeah.
They lie. Yeah. We can stand here and play these games, but we've seen where we've had video tell us one thing.
Right.
Then we go to the police report and it's something different.
Right.
And that's what you have here. Because initially, most of these officers would not even give an interview as to what happened.
Right.
So you tell me, if you initially don't give an interview, we know what's going on. In the case of Akai Gurley, who was shot and killed in the darkened hallway in New York, literally after the officer shoots and kills him, he is texting his union rep.
Right.
He is already planning, hey, let me get my story straight. And so this is why leaking this report is shameful, because if you want to be transparent, you say, we're going to release it publicly on Friday. We're going to pass out copies. Sure. Not, oh, we're going to turn it over to the state's attorney.
Right.
Well, let me go ahead and give y'all some aspects of it. And then for them to interview a woman close to the cop, one of the cops accused, that reminds me of, he was a friend of Darren Wilson giving his side of the story.
Exactly.
Come on, we've seen this movie.
Exactly.
This is a TV show.
This might be redundant to say, but I think it's important to emphasize that they keep being black. The people that this keep happening to.
That's right.
The majority
That's
of them
right.
keep. So it's not simply a bunch of mistakes that are randomly happening that they're lying about. Black people keep being killed and dying mysteriously. Someone else died in the back of a car seat, a father who supposedly killed himself. They said he killed himself. There's a focus on an inability to humanize and have justice for black people. And I think we need to keep that phenomenon at the front of this, because that should be our one of our.
Hold tight 1 second. When we come back, we're going to talk more about this. We'll also deal with how gangs in Baltimore are playing a role in keeping the peace, and also what's the deal with thug. And so we heard Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake earlier this week call the folks who were looting stores and setting cars on fire thugs. President Barack Obama did the exact same thing. The mayor is now walking it back. The president, he's doubling down. But nobody called the white kids in Kentucky who acted a fool and burned cars and they got arrested thugs. Right. So how do we determine who's a thug and who isn't? All that coming up next on News 1 Now on TV 1.
Reality was that when I heard our leaders calling our children thugs and criminals, first thing that came to mind was that my predecessor, Kwesi Mfume, was arrested a dozen times or more before he was 19. Call him a future congressman.
No, I don't think the president would in any way revise the remarks that he shared with all of you in the Rose Garden. The fact of the matter is the vast majority of people who were expressing their concern about the treatment of Freddie Gray while he was in police custody have done so in a responsible way. These are individuals, black and white, I would point out, that have, in the mind of the president, legitimate concerns. After all, that is exactly why the Department of Justice is reviewing the facts of that situation.
Now, on Tuesday, first of all, that was Josh Earnest, the press secretary for President Barack Obama, doubling down on the comments when the president was in the Rose Garden the other day, where he talked about the people who were doing criminal acts and called them thugs, who were looting there in Baltimore. Now, on Tuesday, Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, she also used the exact same language. She used it on Twitter and in a news conference, but now she's apologizing.
I had my anger interpreter speaking and shouldn't have been. I would like to say that I'm a perfect individual. I'll be perfect next year, maybe. I clearly made a mistake. I didn't want to I should not have characterized people's kids as thugs.
Now, that was yesterday. Now, here's what's interesting about this whole debate. Black folks went off on Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake when she said thugs. Mm-hmm. President Barack Obama says it, black folks get real quiet. Black folks, what is it? Either you use it or you don't. Does President Obama somehow get a pass? And why is it all of a sudden we're going to this particular point? We got our panel here. Joining me also is Kevin Sher, community organizer in Baltimore and author of Lessons of Redemption. Kevin, you talk about in your background in terms of on the streets in terms of, I'm quite sure, based upon how it's being used, folks would have called you a thug.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm expanding this beyond Baltimore because, and I made it perfectly clear, I ain't defending nobody, nobody who burns up cars,
Right.
who loots a joint,
Exactly right.
who acts a fool.
Right.
Whether they're in Baltimore, Ferguson, or the white kids at Kentucky,
That's right.
who burn cars,
That's
who
right.
tore stuff up
Right.
because they lost a basketball game,
Right.
or the white folks in Vancouver, Canada,
Right.
who lost the Stanley Cup in 2011, $5 million in property damage, several dozen buildings burned
And burned
down,
the city.
1,200 charges,
That's right.
nearly 30 police officers who were injured, but nobody wants to call them thugs.
Over a hockey game.
That's
Over
not thug life.
losing a hockey game.
That's sports.
Boy, that's
Roland,
crazy.
That makes it
white
different.
people, particularly white males who did most of that tearing up, are not involved in a campaign or the victims of a campaign to dehumanize them and to other them and to make them look like they're disposable and expendable. So they can tear up, do all with murder,
Well,
serial kill, and not be called thugs.
I've seen thugs, right? These were kids. They were 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, right? So they were kids that did something really dumb,
Yeah.
right? Because looting and stealing, that's pretty dumb. Not a cool thing to do. But these weren't thugs, right? And so my biggest problem with that whole conversation was you're talking about kids.
That's right.
You're talking about juveniles, right?
That's right.
And
Black.
we gotta have this conversation about where these kids come from.
That's right.
Because a lot of these kids are dealing with mental health issues as it relates to their parents' substance abuse,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
The effects of poverty on these children,
Absolutely.
right? And it was crazy because this morning I thought about something. I've never heard the conversation about lead paint in white neighborhoods, right? So we don't even talk about how the effect that this has had over generations in urban communities.
I'm also trying to expand this because Richard Sherman
Right.
shows emotion after a game.
He's a thug.
He's
He's a thug. Although he was number 2 in his class in high school,
Right.
got a degree at Stanford University,
Right.
and again, it's who it's being applied to is the issue that I have.
That's right.
So our
right.
readers really need to be careful about the labels they place upon young
Right.
people. Hispanic, African American, Caucasian American, Asian American, whatever they may be. And the problem with the word thug, per se, when you look up the word thug, it doesn't say black, defiant, angry, belligerent black male. But because that word has been now placed upon black men, it's now become synonymous with black men.
Right.
So that's the real problem.
But let me ask you this here. Let me go ahead and ask you this here. But why is it though? And again, I'm looking at social media.
Right.
I'm looking. Why is it that when Mayor Rawlings Blake used it, she was viciously attacked and criticized, but when President Barack Obama used it, black folks like, okay,
Oh, it's
all
a double
right.
standard,
Roland.
Roland. Just admit to it. It's
Roland,
a
when was the
double
last
standard
time-
because you wouldn't say that about the president, but she's an easy target. At least she
right.
came out. She admitted it was. When she said it, I kept saying, "Oh God, how many hours will it be before she takes it back?" She took it back.
Yeah, I
a
said the
lot of
same
people,
thing.
right? A lot of people wouldn't have even taken it back. They would have doubled down. That's what they said. They would
But
have
in terms
doubled
of-
down. But these are kids who grew up in communities where the people don't work, nobody has a job, they don't have any economic future. They don't even have restaurants in some of those neighborhoods in Baltimore, and they have a prison where the prisoners are telling them stay out of jail.
Julio.
The point I wanted to make in response to Roland, his concern about Obama not being critiqued, he said that Obama didn't say anything. I mean, there was no challenge of him calling people a thug, but when did the black community ever challenge Obama?
Right,
Ever.
right.
He's been considered symbolically important and pristine and the first black president. We can't show any flaws or magnify any flaws or do any kind of blatant criticism of him because he's symbolically benevolent. So he hasn't been criticized about anything. But
we haven't had
one
a
thing I want to say,
perfect president yet, in any
about
color.
thug is that a lot of black males have some manhood insecurities and some desperation to be seen as a man, and some of us take on the term thug because thug
Right.
sounds manly,
Right.
thug sounds hard, and we're desperate for some type of semblance of manhood, so we'll buy into these hardcore descriptions so we can have some manhood representation, even though it's dysfunctional.
Kevin,
Yeah, but when you saw that mother
one
hit
second,
that kid
Kevin.
in the head,
We
you knew
can't
he was a
discount
kid.
we can't discount
They're all
the fact
kids.
that the word has been racialized across America, right? The word thug has been racialized. So when people get offended, I understand why people are offended. I understand why Richard Sherman is offended. I love my president, but I think he's wrong,
Yeah.
right? And that's okay. We can disagree.
But I want to read this here real quick, okay? This is from Mediaite. This is Senator Tim Scott, South Carolina, the only Republican United States senator. Baltimore protesters create chaos because they're living in chaos. Now, if folks want to have a conversation, talk about it. This is what he told the Daily Beast. I believe that having law enforcement officers where body cameras provides greater protection for both law enforcement officers and citizens. He goes on to talk about that, but he clearly told them, he said, quote, you create chaos because you're living in chaos. If you're hopeless, you do things that seem absolutely inconsistent with logic, you destroy your own communities.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is Tim Scott ain't got no play.
That's right.
Tim Scott hasn't got much play.
That's right.
And so here you have someone, Republican, Tea Party loves him, South Carolina, who's talking about chaos.
Right.
And again, we are throwing these labels around. I did a radio interview, a guy said, won't you call them thugs? I was like, no. I said, if somebody's looting a building, you know what I'm gonna call them? That's a criminal act.
It's a criminal act.
That's what I'm gonna call it. But when you say, oh, you're a thug, and now it's now being used here and here and here and here, then come back to President Obama, his critics, he's a political thug.
Right.
So, Roland, I'm less concerned about, and you all may disagree, and I respect that. I'm less concerned about President Obama and the word thug. I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about these people living in chaos and feel like they have nothing to lose.
Right.
So they're willing to burn down their own community. And Roland, and then to that point, you talk about leadership and examples. Some young men feel like, well, I've got to behave rough. I've got to be a thug. I've got to be tough. This is my only example.
Right.
I was really struck by our leaders, Congressman Elijah Cummings, the clergy, Reverend Jamal Bryant, and others, lock and step, arm in arm, walking in the street with these young folks, with these protesters, showing them a better way. That's how you get rid of that thug connotation.
Here's why I can't let the president off the hook.
Okay.
Because words matter.
Right.
Language matters. And when he says it and then doubles down, he now gives others license to do it.
All these
and so it happens. And so again, this goes beyond him. This goes beyond Mayor Blake. It now extends, when Richard Sherman does it. Now all of a sudden, if Cleo is on television or I'm on television and we are passionate about the issue, oh, you a thug. And so now it extends, now it trickles down in the workforce when you're a black man, oh, you can't even raise your voice at work because that's now being perceived as being too strident and somehow you're being too forceful. And so that's my whole point. And so that one little four-letter word can cause somebody else to say, see, hey, and then they go, wait, Obama even said it. And now you can apply it here and here and here. That's why I'm saying that it makes a difference. And so I need us to understand that, those words matter. And when they're talking about our children, and here's what I'm saying. If you gonna call the folks in Baltimore thugs, call the folks who cause people to be run out of their homes thugs on Wall Street. Call them economic terrorists. Call them thugs. But see, in America, we only use thugs applied to poor folks, largely black, but we don't use it for those thugs on Wall Street or the thugs who sit here and change the laws to benefit themselves. No, we call them lobbyists. We call them concerned citizens. We call them donors. And so I'm saying, Mr. President, Mayor Blake, or anybody else, you understand your words do matter.
And that's why I think the mayor pulled back on that conversation.
Right.
Because she realized that wasn't cool.
Precisely.
Right? And again, like I said, and I don't have to keep repeating, I love my president, but in this case, he was wrong.
Right. So, and black folks should be willing to say it and not be scared.
Martin Luther King would say, riot is the language of the unheard.
But he also said, the rest of that quote, he also said that you can't have me condemn the riots and I also not condemn the conditions that created the riots. And he also said after that in his speech to the Other America, where he said after that, he said the riots also the unheard, but America, what do you need to hear with the riots? But don't let me go there because I got to go to break. Coming up next, we're going to talk to some gang members who are being demonized by the press, but they're also keeping the peace in Baltimore. Plus, former NFL star Philip Buchanan talks about the money pits and nearly sunk him financially early in his career. Keith Mitchell, NFL linebacker, he was seriously injured, career ended, how yoga brought him back to life. All of that next on News 1 Now, TV 1. Thanks a bunch, Doc. Thank you. Folks, the Baltimore Police Department sent out this alert where they said that gangs were joining up to target cops. That sent shockwaves all across the country. It put the police on high alert. But then all of a sudden, guess what happened? You had, they called it a credible threat, but all of a sudden you had gang members who were out there who were trying to keep the peace, who were trying to keep folks from looting and also from burning stuff down. And then the gang members walked hand in hand with pastors calling for peace. And so who was telling the truth and who isn't? The issue is the role the gang members are playing. Joining me this morning is Davon Love. He's a Baltimore activist. He is also facilitating relationships in terms of dealing with this whole issue with gangs and the cops there in Baltimore. Also on FaceTime is Silky Slim, an activist and a former gang member. Silky, how you doing? All right, we having some audio issues. I don't understand what's, we were working for a moment there, so we'll try to get this figured out. Davon, I want to go to you first. What is, give us a sense of what's happening in Baltimore. What are these conversations, what are these discussions taking place?
Right, well, my work primarily deals with young people, not specifically with gangs, but what's going on is you have a lot of young people in Baltimore that are sick and tired of what's going on. Freddie Gray's death represents many of the same conditions that many of us have talked about throughout the show, and people have been talking about throughout the nation. And it's the level of disinvestment from the very communities that are most directly affected by issues of racism and white supremacy that manifest themselves in police brutality, that manifest themselves in mass incarceration. And so what you're seeing is a mobilization of people who understand that this is an important moment to parlay the energy that we see today into sustainable change and movement building.
One of the things that really jumps out at me when you talk about this here is that gangs, when they were started, they were about protection of the community from cops.
That's right.
That's their history.
Absolutely. I mean, and a part of what we find is that, you know, in our communities, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that are hustling on the miseries of our people. Right. And so there are a bunch of institutions in our communities, grassroots institutions, many of these grassroots, these street organizations, you know, that do work in the community, that mentor folks when other folks leave them behind. And so I think one of the most important things we need to remember, you know, besides the fact that it's important to get justice for Freddie Gray and the family, to deal with the issue of police brutality, but we need to have a comprehensive approach in dealing with the conditions that produced the situation that we see with Freddie Gray. And I think that's an essential piece that helps us deal with the long-term ramifications of what we're seeing right now.
We got Silky on the phone. We had some technical issues with FaceTime. Silky, how do you see, what role can the gang members play in trying to bring peace? And again, returning to their roots of being one about protecting the community as opposed to harming the community?
I think they can play a very important role, Roland. What we see here, when you look at what the police have done, is that it's almost a written law that blacks cannot come together in unity. So when you see these individuals coming together and saying that we're going to start policing our communities instead of terrorizing our communities, police are at a standpoint where they're saying, wait, we can't let these individuals become America's heroes. They are becoming heroes because they are out stopping a lot of the violence that's taking place in Baltimore and speaking to them on yesterday. They have no intentions of bringing any harm to any police officers. The main thing that we must look at and remember is COINTELPRO is still in effect here in America, and we have to deal with that the way that we see it.
Now, what's interesting about that, when you talk about this notion of protection, it wasn't me, or didn't I see a bunch of white folks with rifles and shotguns go down to Clive Bundy's ranch to help him defend himself against federal law enforcement officials?
Yes, and they were not called gangs.
No, they were called patriots.
Yes.
That's right.
They were called defenders of liberty. No, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because, again, it's how we want to frame certain people. And so here's my deal. I don't care if you folks say, well, forget the Black Guerrilla family or whatever folks want to call it, the Crips and the Bloods. Here's the deal. If they are talking about peace, if they're talking about not committing violence, I'm trying to understand why folks would not be embracing that, because this might be the moment to be on the path of redemption and turning lives around.
Well, this is about the bias that is systemic, the bias that's in our institutions, and the bias from all these people. They don't see these kids as kids who could be making a bad mistake, but that could be fixed, and that there could create a path.
Well, he addressed some of the fundamental problems in terms of what creates the bias. It's the white supremacy problem. The white supremacy problem needs to keep itself being the one that's benevolent and good and wearing the white hat and not the white dove. And the black people need to be the bad people, the thugs, the horrible people, so we can not be upset about the criminalization. So we can be not upset about the dehumanization and the killing.
So how do you transition from that? You transition from that by the work that you're doing. You transition from that by keeping the one Baltimore movement going. You transition from that by this meeting that the gangs had at Empowerment Temple. That can't be a one-stop shop. Right. That can't be one meeting. That has to be a continuous dialogue.
Absolutely.
Demonstration of action. That's how you transform perception.
Well,
Davon and Silk.
And a part of the issue is that what we have is there are individual black people that benefit from the way that the system operates, where they get individual benefit in terms of elected office, in terms of certain favors. And what happens is that comes at the expense of being able to have institutions that can affect and benefit the masses of black people in our city. And so that's what we're seeing in terms of our leadership. And so, I mean, there are individuals, you know, I'm not going to name names, in Baltimore that are using this as an opportunity to strengthen their relationship with the administration and try to smooth over what's going on instead of getting to the substance of it. I'm a part of a coalition, Baltimore United for Change.
Right.
And so we're part of a coalition of grassroots organizations that have been doing this work before the Freddie Gray incident came into light. And I want to make it clear, a lot of the elected officials you see, a lot of the public officials you see in Baltimore talking about police brutality didn't start talking about this issue till it became national news. Exactly. And we have to be clear about what that's about. The Democratic Party in Baltimore in particular has allowed this issue to perpetuate itself, thinking about Governor O'Malley when he did in 2006.
Silk, final comment. I got about 30 seconds. I got to go.
But definitely, Roland, I want to thank you for staying on top of these issues. And as you know, this is not just a Baltimore issue.
That's right.
It's a national issue. So we have to stay on top of it in order to make this thing change.
Folks, I surely appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Davon, Silk, Kim, Cleo, yeah, down on the end, Candace.
Oh, you know what?
You know. Oh, calm down. We gotta have some levity. Coming up, former NFL linebacker Keith Mitchell and Congressman Charlie Rango join us, talk about yoga on Capitol Hill. Lord, they need it. And also, former NFL star Philip